The phone number that you reached him on, can you tell me what that number was?
I think I deleted that out of my phone too. I just like cut him out of my life. It's a 910 number. You guys have it.
She wiped her phone the night a family disappeared. Not a factory reset, not a panicked deletion of everything, but something more deliberate. She went through her messages, her search history, her digital footprint, and she chose what to erase, piece by piece, thread by thread. And then she walked into a police station and handed over what was left. That's not how innocent people behave. And the question that people kept asking years later is simple. What was she so afraid they'd find? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps our channel grow.
Thank you so much for coming out here with me, Christopher. I am having a wonderful time. You mean a lot to me, and I'm glad that you're having a blast. I am so out of breath.
Her name is Nichol Kessinger, and if you've heard of the Watts family murders, you've heard her name whispered in the same breath. She was the other woman, the affair, the secret that unraveled a marriage and ended with 3 bodies buried in oil tanks and a shallow grave. But here's what most people don't know. The investigation around her was soft, too soft, and the digital trail she left behind raised more questions than it answered.
You're not being interrogated as a criminal suspect. We're here to understand your relationship with Chris and what you know about Chris and his family.
Let's start with what detectives saw when they first opened her phone records. They were not expecting drama, just a timeline, call logs, text threads, the kind of mundane data everyone generates without thinking. But what they found instead made them stop. There were gaps. Not large enough to scream guilt, but noticeable. Certain messages missing, search history incomplete, threads that started mid-conversation as if the beginning had been surgically removed. It wasn't a wipe. It was grooming, selective, intentional. The kind of editing someone does when they're trying to reshape how they'll be perceived. When investigators ran data recovery and pulled metadata from cell towers, they realized she'd deleted specific items before her first interview. Not everything, just the parts. To her, it was embarrassment. To the detectives, it was a signal to look closer. Because in cases like this, patterns matter. And when someone edits their own story before law enforcement even asks for it, the question shifts. It's not, "What are you hiding?" anymore. It's, "Why did you think you needed to hide it?" She claimed she panicked, that she was terrified of becoming the next tabloid villain. The detectives didn't argue with her. They just kept digging. And what they found beneath the surface was a woman who knew more than she ever admitted. Nichol claimed that she barely knew anything about Chris Watts beyond work, fitness, and weekend plans. She didn't know he was married, not at first. She didn't know about the kids right away. And when she finally learned the truth, Chris told her the marriage was already over, that Shanann was preparing to leave, that the separation was nearly complete.
He mentioned that he did have a significant other, and then he told me that those two were in the process of a separation.
So specifically when he told you he was getting separated from his wife, was that within the first couple of weeks that you knew him, or was that later on? You said you met him around May or June.
Yeah, it was still in June.
Okay.
It would have been before Father's Day.
So had you guys ever gone out on any kind of
No.
date at that time? You just were
No.
conversing at work?
Yeah, that's all it was. And then, I don't know, we started hanging out. We hung out. We went to a park.
Nichol believed him. She said she trusted his version of events because he seemed genuine, vulnerable, and emotionally available in ways that felt real. But the search logs tell a different story. Months before Chris ever mentioned his wife, Nichol had already looked her up. She'd typed Shanann's name into Facebook. She'd scrolled through wedding photos. She'd seen pictures of Bella and Celeste. She knew the family existed long before Chris claimed to have told her. And she never mentioned it. This isn't proof of involvement. It's proof of curiosity. But it's curiosity that directly contradicts her testimony. When investigators asked her when she officially learned about the marriage, she repeated the same line over and over. But the data shows she learned earlier. Enough earlier to notice that Chris's story didn't add up. Enough earlier to question why a man who was supposedly separating still lived at home with his wife and children. Enough earlier to wonder what she was really walking into. And that's where the first open loop forms. Because if she knew Chris was lying, why did she stay? And if she didn't know he was lying, why did she search for his wife in secret? If you're still watching, please like this video and subscribe. It helps our channel grow. Now let's talk about August 13th, the morning Shanann disappeared. Nichole's phone pinged near Frederick, Colorado, close enough to raise eyebrows, not close enough to prove anything, but unusual enough that investigators asked her about it. She said it must have been a wrong turn. Maybe she got lost. Maybe she took a route she'd never taken before. But when detectives compared her driving patterns over the previous months, that route had never appeared, not once. Her phone had never pinged in that area. Her GPS had never logged a detour in that direction. And yet, on the morning of the murders, her device showed up near the crime scene. She couldn't explain it. She didn't try to. She just repeated that it must have been a mistake. And the detectives let it go, because there was no direct evidence, no proof she'd been at the house, no witness who saw her, just a digital breadcrumb that didn't fit the story she was telling. And that's the second open loop. Because coincidences happen, but coincidences that align perfectly with a triple homicide make investigators pause, and this one never got answered. But here's the behavior that disturbed even the most experienced detectives on the case. It wasn't the searches about Shanann. It wasn't the deleted messages. It wasn't the inconsistencies in her timeline. It was what she searched for after the family disappeared. She researched how long phone companies keep text messages. She searched whether police can retrieve deleted texts. She looked up how to permanently erase digital logs. And she did all of this before speaking to detectives, not after, before. Think about that for a moment. You're watching the news. Your boyfriend's family has vanished. His wife and children are missing. The FBI is involved. Search teams are combing the area. And your first instinct isn't grief or shock or confusion. Your first instinct is to ask Google if law enforcement can read your old messages. That's not guilt. But it's fear, and fear is something investigators pay very close attention to. She also searched for a name that surprised everyone in the room. Amber Frey, the woman who unknowingly dated Scott Peterson while he was murdering his pregnant wife, Lacey. Amber didn't commit a crime. She didn't know what Scott had done, but she became one of the most scrutinized figures in the case. Her life was torn apart, her reputation shredded, and everyone remembers what happened to her afterward. When detectives asked Nichol why she'd searched for Amber Frey, she said she didn't want to become a media target. She didn't want her name dragged through the press. She didn't want to be the face of another scandal. And on the surface, that explanation makes sense. But if that's true, why delete the messages? Why scrub the search history? Why remove the very evidence that could have cleared her? She didn't know she wasn't a suspect yet. She didn't know which details would matter. She only knew that something in her phone could be misinterpreted, and she wanted it gone. If you're still watching, please like this video and subscribe. It helps our channel grow. Let's talk about the relationship timeline, because this is where the story starts to fracture even more. Nichol claimed the connection with Chris began months later than the data suggested. She said it was casual, light, nothing serious at first. But the frequency of their contact tells a different story. They texted constantly. They called multiple times a day. They met up during lunch breaks, after work, late at night. The intensity didn't match her description. It matched something consuming, something that had taken over both of their lives. She also said she never pressured Chris to make big decisions. She said she respected the fact that he had a family, that she understood the situation was complicated. But investigators found messages where she told him to find a new apartment, to start fresh, to move forward. She even researched the cost of selling the Watts family home before the murders happened, before Shanann and the girls were gone. She was already thinking about what came next, about the life she and Chris could build once the marriage was officially over. Was that manipulation, or was it just a woman in love trying to nudge her boyfriend toward a decision she believed he'd already made? The line between those two things is thin, and in this case, it's impossible to know which side she was on. Now let's look at the interviews, because this is where the investigation faltered. The detectives were calm, almost friendly. They treated Nichol like a cooperative witness, not a suspect.
You're not being interrogated as a criminal suspect. We're here to understand your relationship with Chris and what you know about Chris and his family.
And in fairness, there was no direct evidence linking her to the crime. No forensics, no confession, no witness testimony placing her at the scene. But the softness came with consequences. They didn't seize her phone immediately. They didn't check the devices she owned before the data wipe. They didn't ask follow-up questions about the timeline gaps or the late-night phone activity. And they didn't challenge her on the contradictions. This is the part of the story that bothers people. Not because Nichol was guilty, but because the investigation around her was too gentle for a case this brutal. And once the opportunity to dig deeper had passed, it was gone forever. Let's pause for a moment and consider what could explain all of this without implying direct involvement. She could have deleted her phone because she panicked about being dragged into a national scandal. She could have searched for Shanann out of simple curiosity about the wife of a man she was sleeping with. She could have lied about the timeline to protect herself from public humiliation. She could have researched police procedures because she was terrified of looking complicit. She could have driven near Frederick by pure coincidence. All of those explanations exist. All are plausible. And yet when you line them up together, the story doesn't settle. Something is always slightly off, like a picture frame that's tilted just enough to notice, but not enough to prove it wasn't intentional. Investigators struggled with this too. They debated, quietly, how much she knew. They questioned whether she pushed Chris emotionally, whether she encouraged the separation, whether she was a pressure point in his unraveling. But they never believed she physically participated, and legally, that's what matters. Still, digital footprints don't lie. Curiosity doesn't erase itself, and timelines don't bend on their own. There's another detail worth exploring. Chris changed his story more than once, and in one version he hinted that Nichol knew something. He didn't accuse her of anything concrete, but he suggested she knew more about the family than she admitted, that she asked about the girls, that she asked about the state of the marriage, that she wanted him to move forward faster, that she made him feel like staying in his marriage was weakness. This version is unreliable. Chris has shifted his narrative many times. He's blamed Shanann, he's blamed stress, he's blamed himself, he's blamed the devil. But even the unreliable can highlight pressure points, and Nichol was a pressure point. In his prison letters, Chris paints a disturbingly symbolic portrait of Nichol, not as a partner, not even as a typical affair, but as a force he claims pulled him toward the life he thought he wanted. He repeatedly refers to her as a Jezebel, a biblical archetype of manipulation and seduction. He tries to turn his relationship with her into a moral fable rather than a conscious choice. He describes her attention as intoxicating. He calls her compliments honey on my soul. He says her presence clouded his judgment, weakened his commitment to his family, and fed the part of him that wanted out of his marriage at any cost. He writes that she made him feel seen and admired in ways he hadn't felt in years. That this emotional high created a tunnel vision where everything else, Shanann, Bella, Celeste, faded into the background. He even says Nichol became the death of me, that she represented the fantasy life he was willing to burn everything for. These letters don't offer evidence of her involvement, but they expose how Chris himself tried to shift the emotional blame onto her. recasting the murders as the fallout of an irresistible temptation instead of a choice he made alone. It's a psychological pattern common among offenders, externalizing the source of darkness, attaching it to another person, rewriting the narrative in a way that makes the crime feel like something that happened to them rather than something they decided to do. In Chris's mind, Nichol wasn't just an affair. She was the symbol he used to justify the destruction he caused. But symbols don't kill. People do. And Chris Watts is the one who strangled his daughters, who buried his wife in a shallow grave, who disposed of his children's bodies in oil tanks. Nichol didn't do that. Chris did. And no amount of symbolic blame changes that fact. So where is Nichol now? She's vanished. No interviews, no statements, no presence online. Just gone. Some say it was fear. Others say it was advice from attorneys or family. Whatever the reason, her disappearance only added oxygen to the speculation, because when someone goes silent in a case this high profile, people fill the void with their own theories, and those theories are rarely kind. Years later, people still ask the same questions. Why wasn't she treated like a potential accomplice? Why weren't her devices seized sooner? Why did her search history contradict her testimony? Why did she clean her phone before turning it over? And why did she search the name of a woman who became famous only after her boyfriend murdered his wife? These aren't accusations, they're unresolved points in a case that still unsettles people. Let's draw all of this together, because there are two paths here. The first path says she panicked. She hid her messages because she didn't want to become the face of another high-profile scandal. She was afraid of being blamed, shamed, and destroyed by a story she didn't create. She tried to protect herself because fear can make anyone behave irrationally. And in that version of events, she's a victim too. Not of violence, but of circumstance, of being in the wrong relationship at the wrong time. In the second path, she knew something. Maybe not everything, maybe not the plan, but enough for her behavior to shift, enough for her to realize what had happened and try to erase her connection to Chris as fast as possible, enough for her to start scrubbing the digital trail before the detectives came calling. And in that version, she's not an accomplice, but she's not innocent either. She's somewhere in between, a person who sensed danger and chose self-preservation over truth. Both paths exist, both have evidence pointing in their direction, and that's why the questions around Nichol Kessinger haven't faded. This case is full of details that tighten your stomach because the conclusions never settle cleanly. You sense something beneath the surface that no one ever articulated, a layer of tension that investigators touched but never pursued, something that sits between what she said and what the data shows. Was she more involved than we thought? Maybe involvement isn't the right word. Maybe the better question is, did she know more than she admitted? Only she knows the real answer, and until she speaks again, the open loops stay open. Here's what I've learned from studying cases like this. The truth isn't always binary. People can be complicit without being guilty. They can know something without knowing everything. They can sense danger and still choose to look away. And sometimes the most unsettling part of a story isn't what someone did, it's what they chose not to do. Nichol Kessinger didn't kill anyone, but she deleted her phone the night a family disappeared. She searched for ways to hide her digital footprint before law enforcement asked for it. She lied about her timeline. She researched the woman who became infamous for dating a murderer, and she vanished the moment the world started asking questions. That's not proof of guilt, but it's not proof of innocence either. It's proof that fear changes people, that self-preservation can look a lot like complicity, and that sometimes the hardest truths to uncover are the ones people bury before anyone thinks to ask. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If this video made you think, consider leaving a like. It helps more than you expect. And if you want more deep dives into cases like this, stories that don't get answered easily, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.